What's going on, everybody? Back at it with it yet again. Sam, with your reading, subchapter 5. Beverly takes a whooping. Well, it's not ever hit one. Beverly Rogan takes a whooping. Tom was nearly asleep when the phone rang. He struggled halfway up, leaning toward it, and then felt one of Beverly's breasts press up against his shoulder as she reached over him to get it. He flopped back on his pillow, wondering dully who was calling on their unlisted home phone number at this hour of the night. He heard Beverly say hello, and then he drifted off again. He had put away nearly 3 six-packs during the baseball game, and he was shagged. Then Beverly's voice, sharp and curious, "What?" drilled into his ear like an ice pick, and he opened his eyes again. He tried to sit up, and the phone cord dug into his thick neck. "Get that fucking thing off me, Beverly," he said. And she got up quickly and walked around the bed, holding the phone cord up with tented fingers. Her hair was a deep red, and it flowed over her nightgown in natural waves almost to her waist. Horace's hair. Her eyes did not stutter to his face, to read the emotional weather there. And Tom Rogan didn't like that. He sat up. His head was starting to ache. Shit. It had probably already been aching. But when you were asleep, you didn't know it. Welcome into one. He went to the bathroom, urinated for what felt like 3 hours, then decided that as long as he was up, he had to get another beer and try to take this curse off this impending hangover. Passing back through the bedroom on his way to the stairs, a man in a white boxer shorts that flapped like sails. He was considerable belly, his arms like slabs. He was more like a Doc Walloper than the president and general manager of Beverly Fashions Incorporated. He looked over his shoulder and yelled crossly, "If it's that bold dyke Leslie, tell her to get out her some model and let us sleep." Beverly glanced up briefly, shook her head to indicate it wasn't Leslie, and then looked back at the phone. Tom felt the muscles at the back of his neck tighten up. It felt like a dismissal. Dismissed by my lady. My fucking lady. In one word. This was starting to look like it might turn into a situation. It might be that Beverly needed a short refresher course on who was in charge around here. It was possible. Sometimes she did. She was a slow learner. He went downstairs and padded along the hall to the kitchen, absently picking the seat of his shorts out of the crack of his ass, and opened the refrigerator. His reaching hand closed on nothing more alcoholic than a blue Tupperware dish of leftover noodles ramen. I don't know why they pronounced it like that, but whatever. All the beer was gone. Even the can he kept away in the back, much as he kept a $20 bill folded up behind his driver's license for emergencies, was gone. The game had gone 14 innings, and all for nothing. The White Sox had lost. Bunch of candy asses this year. His eyes drifted to the bottles of hard stuff on the glass-stained shelf of the kitchen bar for a moment, and he saw himself pouring a splash of bean over a single ice cube. Then he walked back into the stairs, knowing that he was asking for more trouble than his head was currently in. He glanced at the face of the antique pendulum clock at the foot of the stairs and saw it was past midnight. This intelligence did nothing to improve his temper, which was never very good, even at the best of times. Welcome in. Hope you're having a good one. He climbed the stairs with slow deliberation, too aware, of how hard his heart was working. Boom, thud, boom, thud, kaboom, thud. It made him nervous when he could tell, sometimes, when that wait, what? Ah, he could feel his heart beating in his ears and wrists, as well as his chest. Um, I could, but it makes it hard. That's why you just tune in. However, I can invite you. Ba. 1 second. Never read with anybody on here before. I'm loving it. There. Click that link. Ba. He climbed the stairway. It made him nervous when he could feel his heart beating in his ears and wrists as well as his chest. Sometimes, when that happened, he would imagine it as not as a squeezing, loosening organ, but as a big dial on the left side of his chest with a needle edging ominously into the red zone. He did not like that shit. He did not need that shit. What he needed was a good night's sleep. But the nun cunt he was married to is still on the phone. I understand that, Mike. Yes, I am. I know, but a longer pause. Bill Denbrough? She exclaimed, and the ice pick drilled into his ear again. He stood outside the bedroom door until he got his breath back. Now it was like ka-thud, ka-thud, ka-thud again. The booming had stopped. He briefly imagined the needle edging out of the red, and then willed the picture. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba. To let you in.
Huh?
To let you in.
Well, that's very nice. But I wasn't going to be able to stay for very long because I didn't even blow dry my hair yet, and we got to get going.
I guess.
Yeah, but
now I lost my spot.
Huh?
I lost my spot for a second.
Yeah.
It made him nervous. A long pause. Still, Bill Denbrough? She explained. And the ice pick drilled back into his ear again. He stood outside the bedroom door until he got his breath back. Now it's ka-thud, ka-thud, ka-thud again. The booming had stopped. He briefly imagined the needle edging out of the red, and then willed the picture away. He was a man, for Christ's sakes, and a damned good one. Not a furnace with a bad thermostat. He was in great shape. He was iron. And if she needed to relearn that, he would be happy to teach her. He started in, then thought better of it, and stood where he was a moment longer, listening to her, not particularly caring about who she was talking to or what she said, only listening to the rising, falling tones of her voice, and what he felt was the old familiar dull rage. He had met her in a downtown Chicago area. I think you can actually, Dolores. I think Twitch does let you do StreamYards to it. I'll help you out with it later. He had met her in a downtown Chicago singles bar about 4 years ago. Conversation had been easy enough because they both worked in the Standard Browns building and knew a few of the same people. Tom worked for Kingdom Landry, public relations on 42 Beverly Marsh, so she had been then. Was an assistant designer at Delia Fission's on 12. Delia, which would later enjoy a modest vogue in the Midwest, catered to young people. Delilah skirts and blouses and shawls and slacks were sold largely to what Delilah Castleman called youth stores and what Tom called head shops. Tom Rogan had known two things about Beverly Marsh almost at once. She was desirable, and she was vulnerable. In less than a month, he knew a third as well. She was talented, very talented. In her drawings of casual dresses and blouses, we saw a money machine of almost scary potential. Not in the head shops, though, but did not say. At least not then. No more bad lighting, no more knockdown prices, no more shitty displays somewhere in the back of the store between the dope paraphernalia and the Rocco t-shirts. Leave that shit for small times. He had known a great deal about her before she knew he had any real interest in her. She knew he had real interest in her. And that was just the way Tom wanted it. He had been looking for someone like Beverly Marsh all his life. And he moved in with the speed of a lion, making a run at a slow antelope. Not that her vulnerability showed on the surface. He looked and saw a gorgeous woman, slim but abundantly stacked. Hips weren't so great, maybe, but she had a great ass and great set of tits he had ever seen. Tom Rogan was a tit man. Always had been. I agree with that. Tall girls almost always had disappointing tits. They wore thin shirts and their nipples drove you crazy. But when he got those thin shirts off, just because those nipples were all they really had. The tits themselves looked like pole knobs on a bureau drawer. More than a handful wasted, his college roommate had been fond of saying. But as far as Tom was concerned, his college roommate had been so full of shit, he squawked going into a turn. Oh, she had been some kind of fine looking, all right. With that dynamite body and gorgeous, olive red, wavy hair. But she was weak somehow. It was as if she was sending out radio signals which only he could receive. You could point to certain things. How much she smoked, but he almost cured her of that. The restless way her eyes moved, never quite meeting the eyes of whoever she was talking to her, only touching them from time to time, then leaping nimbly away. Her habit of lightly rubbing elbows when she was nervous, look of her fingernails, which were kept neat but brutally short. Welcome into stream, just joined. Tom noticed this latter the first time he met her. She picked up her glass of white wine. He saw her nails, and thought, she keeps them short like that because she bites them. Lions might not think, at least not the way people think, but they see. And when antelopes start away from the waterhole, alerted by that dusty rogue scent of approaching death, the cats can observe which one follows to the rear of the pack. Maybe because it has a lame leg. Maybe because it's just naturally slower. Or maybe its sense of danger is less developed. And it might even be possible that some antelopes and some women want to be brought down. Suddenly he heard a sound that jerked him rudely away from his memories. The snap of her cigarette lighter. The dull rage came again. His stomach filled with a heat which was not entirely unpleasant. Smoking! She was smoking! They had a few of Tom Rogan's special seminars on the subject. And here she was, doing it again. She was a slow learner, right? But a good teacher is at his best when they slow learners. Yeah, she said now. Uh-huh. All right. Yes, she listened. Then under a strange, jagged laugh he had never heard before. Two things you ask. Since you ask. Reserve me a room and say me a prayer. Yes, okay? Me too. Good night. She was hanging up as he came in. He meant to come in hard, yelling at her to out, put it out right now. But when he saw her, the words died in his throat. He had seen her like this before, but only 2 or 3 times. Once before their big show, once before their private preview showing for national buyers, and once when they had gone to New York for the International Designs Awards. Hey there, Amber. Welcome into stream. She was moving across the bedroom in long strides. Alright, Amber, appreciate you still dropping that like button. It still helps me out. She was moving across the bedroom in long strides. The white lace nightgown molded to her body. The cigarette clamped between her front teeth. God, he hated the way she looked, with a butt in her mouth. Setting back a little white riband over her left shoulder, like smoke from a locomotive stack. But it was her face that really gave him pause. That caused the planned shout to down his throat. His heart was kabam, and he winced, telling himself that what he felt was not fear, but only surprise at her finding her this way. She was a woman who really came alive, although only when the rhythm of her work spiked toward the climax. Each of those remembered occasions had, of course, been career-related. Those times he had seen a different woman from one he knew so well. A woman who fucked up his sensitive fear radar with wild bursts of static. The one who came out in times of stress was strong but high-strung. Fearless but unpredictable. There were lots of color in her cheeks now. A natural blush high on her cheekbones. Her eyes were wide and sparkly, not a trace of sleep left in them. Her hair flowed and streamed, and oh, looky here, friends and neighbors. Oh, and you just looky right here. She taking a suitcase out of the closet? A suitcase? By God, she is. Reserve me a room. Say me a prayer. Well, welcome into who's ever singing. Well, she wasn't going to need a room in any hotel, not in the foreseeable future, because little Beverly Rogan was going to be staying right here at home. Thank you very much. And taking our meal standing up for the next 3 or 4 days. But she very well might need a prayer or two before he was through with her. She tossed the suitcase on the foot of the bed, and then went to her bureau. Dresser, just call it a dresser, dude. Why bureau? She opened the top drawer and pulled out 2 pairs of jeans and a pair of cords. Tossed them into a suitcase. Cords. You mean a belt? Tossed them into a suitcase. Back to the bureau. Cigarette streaming smoke over her shoulder. She grabbed a sweater, a couple t-shirts, one of the old ship and shore blouses that she looked so stupid in, but refused to give up. Whoever had called her sure hadn't been a jet setter. It was just dull stuff. Strictly Jackie Kennedy high-end support weekend stuff. Not that he cared about who called her or where she thought she was going, since she wasn't going anywhere. Those were not the things which pecked steadily in his mind. Dully, dull and achy from too much beer, and not enough sleep. It was a cigarette. Supposedly, she had thrown them all out, but she had held out on him. The proof was clamped between her teeth right now. Because she still had not noticed him standing in the doorway, he allowed himself to take pleasure remembering the 2 nights which had assured him of his complete control over her. I don't want you to smoke around me anymore, he told her, as they headed home from a party in Lake Forest. October, that had been. I have to choke that shit down at parties and not the office. I don't have to choke it down while I'm with you. You know what it's like? Alright, I'm sleep making man. Yeah, I'm having a decent Tuesday so far. Woke up, toked a little bit, and now I'm reading. It's unpleasant. You know what it's like. I'm going to tell you the truth. It's unpleasant, but it's the truth. It's like having to eat someone else's snot. You know, he thought this would bring some faint spark of protest, but she had only looked at him in her shy, wanting to please way. Excuse me. Sorry, chat. Uh, all right, Tom. Pitch it then. She pitched it. Tom had been in good humor for the rest of that night. Want some chat? Throat's dry. I need some water. Uh, uh, there we go. Dang. Get on a page, what, chat? Ruh-roh. Yeah, well. Glad I already read that page. Well, I'm still reading it, but so. A few weeks later, coming out of the movie, she unthinkably lit a cigarette in the lobby and puffed it as they walked across the parking lot to the car. It had been a bitter November night. The wind chopping like a maniac at any exposed square inch of flesh he could find. Tom remembered he had been able to smell the lake, as he sometimes could on cold nights. A flat smell of both fishy and somehow empty. He let her smoke the cigarette. He even opened the door for her door for her when they got into the car. He got in behind the wheel, closed his own door, and said, "Bev." She took the cigarette out of her mouth, turned toward him, inquiring, and he unloaded a pretty good one on her pretty good. His hard, open hand stroking across her cheek, hard enough to make his palm tingle, hard enough to rock her head back against the headrest. Her eyes widened enough to rock her head back against it. Her eyes widened with surprise and pain, and something else as well. Her own hand flew to her cheek to investigate the warmth and tingling numbness there. She cried out, "Ow, Tom!" He looked at her, eyes narrowed, mouth smiling casually, completely alive, ready to see what would come next. How she would react. His cock was stiffening in his pants, but he barely noticed. That was for later. For now, school was in session. He replayed what had just happened. Her face. What had that third expression been? There for a bare instant and then gone. First the surprise, then the pain, then the nostalgia? Would give a memory of some memory? It had only been for a moment. He didn't think she knew had been there, or her face, or in her mind. Now. It was all being the first thing she didn't say. He knew it was all in his own name. It wasn't, "You son of a bitch." It wasn't, "See you later, Macho City." It wasn't, "We're through, Tom." She only looked at him with her wounded, brimming hazel eyes and said, "Why did you do that?" Then she tried to say something else and burst into tears and said, "Throw it out." "What? What, Tom?" Her makeup was running down her face in muddy tracks. He didn't mind that. He kind of liked seeing her that way. It was messy, but there was something sexy about it too. Slutty. Kind of exciting. The cigarette. Throw it out. And realization dawning. What's it? Kill. I just forgot, she cried. That's all. Throw it out, Bev, or you're gonna get another shot. She rolled the window down, pitched a cigarette. When she turned back to him, her face pale and scared and somehow serene. You can't. You aren't supposed to hit me. That's a bad basis for a lasting relationship. She was trying to find a tone, an adult rhythm of speech, and failing. He had regressed her. He was in his car with a child, voluptuous and sexy as hell, but child. Can't and aren't are two different things, Keed, he said. He kept his voice calm, but inside he was jittering and jiving. And I'll be the one to decide on what constitutes as a lasting relationship and what doesn't. If you can live with that, fine. If you can't, you can take a walk. I won't stop you. I might kick you once in the ass as a going away present, but I won't stop you. It's a free country. What more can I say? Maybe you've said enough already. Maybe you've already said enough, she whispered. And he hit her again, harder than the first time, because no bride was ever going to smart off to Tom Rogan. He would pop the Queen of England if she cracked smart to him. Her cheek banged the padded dashboard. Her hand gripped for the door handle, and then she fell away. She only crouched in the corner like a rabbit, one hand over her mouth. Her eyes large and wet and frightened. Tom looked at her for a moment, then he got out and walked around the back of the car. He opened the door. His breath was smoke in the black, windy November air, and the smell of the lake was very clear. You want to get out, Bev? I started reaching for the door handle, so I guess you must want out. Okay, it's all right. I asked you to do something and you said you would. Then you didn't. So you want to get out? Come on, get up. What the fuck, Rick? Get up. You want to get out? No, she whispered. What? I can't hear you. No, you don't want to get out, she said, a little louder. What? Those cigarettes giving you easy, man? If you can't talk, I'll get you a fucking megaphone. It's your last chance, Beverly. You speak up so I can hear you. Do you want to get out of this fucking car? Or do you want to come back with me? Want to come back with you, she said, and clasped her hands on her skirt like a little schoolgirl. Like a little girl. She wouldn't look at him. Tears slipped down her cheeks. All right, he said, fine. But first you say this for me, Bev. You say, I forgot about smoking in front of you, Tom. Now she looked at him, her eyes wounded, pleading, inarticulate. You can make me do this, her eyes said, but please don't. Don't. I love you. Can't it be over? No, it cannot. Because that was not the bottom of her wanting, and both of them knew. Say it. I forgot about smoking in front of you, Tom. Good. Now say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, she repeated dully. The cigarette lay smoking on the pavement like a cut piece of fuse. People leaving the theater glanced over at them. A man standing by the open passenger's door of a late model faded into the Lord Vega, the woman sitting inside, her hands clasped firmly in her lap, her head down, the dome light outlining the soft fall of her hair in gold. He crushed the cigarette out. He smeared it against the blacktop. Now say, I'll never do it again without your permission. I'll never. Her voice began to pitch. Never. Say it, Bev. Never do it again without your permission. So he had slammed the door and gone back around the driver's seat. He got behind the wheel and drove them back to the downtown apartment. Neither of them said a word. Half the relationship had been set in the parking lot. The second half was set 40 minutes later in Tom's bed. She didn't want to make love, she said. She didn't want to make love, she said. He saw a different truth in her eyes, in the sturdy cock of her legs, however. And when he got her blouse off, her nipples had been rock hard. She moaned when he brushed them, and cried out softly when he suckled them first one and then the other, moving them restlessly as he did so. She grabbed his hand and thrust it between her legs. "I thought you didn't want to," he said, and she had turned her face away. But she did not let go of his hand. The rocking motion of her lips actually sped up. Of her hips actually speeded up. He pushed her back on the bed, and now he was gentle, not ripping her underwear, but removing with a careful consideration that was almost prissy. Sliding into her was like sliding into some exquisite oil. He moved with her, using her, but letting her use him as well. She came the first time almost at once, crying and digging her nails into his back. Then they rocked together in long, slow strokes, and somewhere in there he thought she came again. Tom would get close. Then he would think of White Sox betting advertiser who closing to undercut him for Chisley accountant at work. And he would be okay again. Then she began to speed up, her rhythm finally dissolving into an excited bucking. He looked at her face. The raccoon ring was mascara, the smear of lipstick, and felt himself suddenly shooting deliriously towards the edge. She jerked her hips up harder and harder. There had been no beer gut between them in those days, and their bellies clapped hands in a quickening beat. Near the end, she screamed and bit his shoulder with her small, even teeth. "How many times did you come?" he asked her, after they showered. She turned her face away, and when she spoke, her voice was so low he almost couldn't hear her. "That isn't something you're supposed to ask." "Now, who told you that? Mr. Joers? Mr. Regooters? I don't know that word or that name." He took her face in one hand, thumb pressing deep into one cheek, fingers pressing into the other, palm cupping her chin between. "You talk to Tom, you hear me?" he said. "You hear me, Bev? Talk to Papa." "3," she said reluctantly. "Good," he said. "You can have a cigarette." She looked at him distrustfully, her red hair spread over the pillows, wearing nothing but a pair of hip hugger panties. Just looking at her, the way he got his motor turning again, over and again. He nodded. "Go on," he said. "That's all right." They'd been married in a civil ceremony 3 months later. Two of his friends had come. The only friends of hers to attend had been Kay McCall, whom Tom called that titsy woman lib bitch. All these memories went through Tom's mind in the space of seconds, like a speeded up piece of film as he stood in the doorway watching her. She had gone on to the bedroom drawer, what he was sometimes called the weekend bureau, and now she was tossing up underwear into a suitcase. Not the sort of stuff he liked. The slippery satins and smooth silks. This was cotton stuff, little girl stuff. Most of it faded with little puffs and popped with elastic with the waistbands. Cotton nightie that was something like our Little House on the Prairie. She poked in the back of this bottom drawer to see what else might be lurking in there. Tom Rogan, meanwhile, moved across the shag rug toward his wardrobe. His feet were bare, and his passage noiseless as a puff of breeze. "It was that cigarette." That was what had him really got him mad. It had been a long time since she had forgotten that first lesson. There had been other lessons learned since, a great many. There had been hot days when he had worn long sleeved blouses, or even cardigan sweaters all the way down to the neck. Gray days when she had worn sunglasses. That first lesson had been so sudden and fundamental. He had forgotten the telephone call that had wakened him out of his deepening sleep. It was a cigarette. If she was smoking now, then she had forgotten Tom Rogan. Temporarily, of course. Only temporarily. But even temporarily is damned long. It was too damned long. What might have caused her to forget didn't matter. Such things were not to happen in this house for any reason. There was a wide black strip of leather hanging from a hook inside the closet door. There was no buckle on it. He had removed that long ago. It was doubled over on at one end where a buckle would have gone. This doubled over section formed into a loop, which Tom Rogan now slipped to his hand. Tom, you've been had, his mother had said sometimes. Well, not sometimes. It's maybe not such a good word. Maybe often would have been a better one. You come here, Tommy. I got you a whooping. His life as a child had been punctured with whoopings. He had finally escaped to Wichita State College. But apparently, there was no such thing as complete escape, because he continued to hear a voice in dreams. Come here, Tommy. I gotta give you a whooping. Whooping! He had been the oldest of four. 3 months after the youngest had been born, Ralph Rogan had died. Well, died was not such a good word. Maybe committed suicide would have been a better way to put it, since he had poured a generous quantity of lye into a tumbler of gin and quaffed a stubble spruce while sitting on the bathroom hopper. Damn. Mrs. Rogan had found work at the Ford plant. Tom, although only 11, became the man of the family. If he screwed up, the baby shot her ditties after the sitter went home, and the mess was still in them when the mom got home. He forgot to cross Megan on the Broad Street corner after her nursery school got out that day. Got out that and that nosy Miss Grant saw. If he happened to be watching American Bandstand while Josie made a mess in the kitchen, if any of those things happened, or 1,000 other things happened, then, after the smaller children went to bed, the spanking stick would come out. And she called it innovation. Come here, Tommy. I gotta give you a whooping. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Damn, Chad, we still got another 10.5 pages to go. Look. Better to be a whooper than the whooped. If he had learned nothing else on that great toll road of life, he had learned that. So he flipped the loose end of the belt over once and pulled the loop snug. Then he closed his fist over it. Felt good. It made him feel like grown up. She had found one last thing in the back of the drawer. An old white cotton bra with gun shove cups. The thought that this early morning call might have been from a lover surfaced briefly in his mind, and then sank again. That was ridiculous. Beverly, that was ridiculous. A woman going away to meet her lover did not pack her faded shipping short blouses and her cotton Kmart undies with pops and snarls in the elastic. Also, she wouldn't dare. Beverly, he said softly. And she turned at once, startled, her eyes wide, her long hair swinging. The belt hesitated, dropped a little. He stared at her, feeling that little bloom of uneasiness again. Yes, she had looked at him this way before the big shows. And then he hadn't gotten in her way. Understanding that she still felt a mixture of fear and competitive aggressiveness, it was as if her head was full of illuminating gas. A single spark, and she would explode. She had seen the shows not as a chance to split from Delia Fashions to make a living, or even a fortune on her own. If that had been all, she would have been fine. But if that were all, if that had all been all, she would have been fine. But if there was all, if that were all, she also would not have been so ungodly talented. She had seen those shows as a kid as a kind of super exam on which she would rather be graded by fierce teachers. What she saw on those occasions was some creature without a face. It had no face, but it did have a name: authority. All of that wide-eyed nervousness on her face now, but not just there. It was all around, an aura that seemed almost visible, a high-tension charge which made her suddenly both more alluring and more dangerous than she had seemed to him in years. She was afraid because she was here, all right. The essential she, as apart from that, she, Tom Rogan, wanted her to be, that she had to be made, or that she had been made. Beverly looked shocked and frightened. She also looked almost madly exhilarated. Her cheeks glowed with hectic color, yet there were stark white patches below her lower lids, which looked almost like a second pair of eyes. Her forehead glared or glowed with a creamy resonance, and the cigarette was still jutting out of her mouth, now at a slight up angle, as if she thought she was a goddamn Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The cigarette. Um, damn. I gotta be right back. Check. I have to use the potty. Slight intermission. Sucks I can't, pause the video. Uh, Alright, and we're back, chat. Sorry, chat, I lost my page. Alright, here we go. And the cigarette was still jutting out of her mouth, now at a slight up angle, as if she thought she was a goddamn Franco Delano Roosevelt. The cigarette, just looking at it, caused it dull fury to wash over him again, and in a green wave. Faintly, far back in his mind, speaking in a dull and listless voice. Someday they're gonna kill me, Bill. Do you know that? Someday, we're just gonna go too far. That will be the end. It will snap. He had answered, "You do it my way, Bev, and that day will never come." Now, before the rage blotted out everything, he wondered if that day hadn't come after all. A cigarette. Never mind the call, the packing, a weird look on her face. He would deal with the cigarette. Then he would fuck her. Then they would discuss the rest. But then it might seem important. But then it might even seem important. Tom, she said. Tom, I have to. You're smoking, he said. His voice seemed to come from a distance, as if over pretty good radio. Looks like you forgot, babe. Where you been hiding them? Look, I put it out, she said, and went to the bathroom door. She flipped the cigarette. Even from here, you could see the teeth marks driven deep into the filter, into the bowl of John. Psst. She came back out. Tom, that was an old friend, an old friend. I have to. Shut up. Well, that's what you have to do, he shouted at her. Just shut up. But the fear he wanted to see, the fear of him, was not on her face. There was fear, but it had come out of the telephone, and fear was not supposed to come to Beverly from that direction. It was almost as if she didn't see the bell, didn't see him. And Tom felt a trickle of unease. Was he there? It was a stupid question, but was he? The question was so terrible and so elemental that for a moment he felt in danger of coming completely unwrapped from the root of himself and just floating off like a tumbleweed in a high breeze. Then he got hold of himself. He was here, all right. And that was a quite enough fucking psycho babble for one night. He was here. He was Tom Rogan. Tom by God Rogan. And if this dippy cunt didn't straighten up and fly straight in the next 30 seconds or so, she was going to look like she got pushed out so fast by a boxcar by a mean railroad dick. Got to give you a whooping. Sorry about that, babe. He had seen that mixture of fear and aggressiveness before he asked. Now, for the first time ever, it flashed out at him. Put that thing down, she said. I have to go out to O'Hara as fast as I can. Are you here, Tom? Are you? He pushed the thought away. A strip of leather which had once been a belt, slowly before the strip of leather which had once been a belt, swung slowly before him like a pendulum. His eyes flickered and then held fast to her face. Listen to me, Tom. There's been some trouble back in my hometown. Very bad trouble. I had a friend in those days. I guess he would have been my boyfriend, except we weren't quite old enough for that. He was only an 11-year-old kid with a bad stutter back then. He's a novelist now. You even read one of his books, I think. The Black Rapids? She searched his face, but his face gave no sign. There was only the belt penduluming back and forth, back and forth. He stood with his head lowered and his stocky legs slightly apart. Then she ran her hand restlessly through her hair, distracted, as if she had many important things to think of, and hadn't seen the belt at all. And that haunting, awful question resurfaced in his head. Are you there? Are you sure? That book laid around here for weeks. I never made the connection. Maybe I should have. But we're all older, and I haven't even thought about David in a long, long time. Anyway, Bill had a brother, George. George was killed before I really knew Bill. He was murdered. And then, the next summer, but Tom had listened to enough craziness from within and from without. He moved in on it fast, cocking his right arm back over his shoulder like a man about to throw a javelin. The belt hissed a path through the air. Beverly saw it coming and tried to duck away, but her right shoulder struck the bathroom doorway. Ouch. And there was a meaty flop as the belt struck her left forearm, leaving it a red wheel. Leaving a red welt. I think he meant to say welt. Welt. Think I forgot the T? Gonna whoop you, Tom repeated. His voice was sane, even regretful, but his teeth showed in a white and frozen smile. He wanted to see that look in her eyes, that look of fear and terror and her shame. That look I said, yes, you're right, I deserved it. That looked I said, yes, you're all right. I feel your presence. Then love could come back. And that was right and good, because he did love her. They could even have a discussion, if she wanted it, of exactly who had called and what this was all about. But that came later. That must come later. For now, school is in session. The old 1-2. First the whooping, then the fucking. Sorry, babe. Tom, don't do that. He swung the sidearm and it licked around her hip. And saw it lick around her hip. There was a satisfying snap as it finished on her buttock. And then, and Jesus, she was grabbing at it. She was grabbing at the belt. For a moment, Tom Rogan was so astonished by this unexpected act of insubordination that he almost lost his punisher. Would have lost it, except for the loot, which was tucked securely into his fist. Hey, welcome, man. Have a good story. He jerked it back. Don't you ever try to grab something away from me, he said hoarsely. You hear me? You ever do that again, you'll be spending months pissing raspberry juice. Tom, stop it. And her very tone infuriating. She sounded like a playground monitor talking down to tantruming 6-year-old. I have to go. This is no joke. People are dead. I made a promise a long time ago. Tom heard little of this. He bellowed and ran at her with his head down, belt swinging blindly. He hit her with it, driving her away from the doorway along the bedroom wall. He cocked his arm back, hit her, cocked his arm back again, hit her, cocked his arm back, hit her. Later that morning, he would not be able to raise that arm above eye level until he had swallowed 3 codeine tablets. Before now, he was aware of nothing but the fact that she was defying him. She had not only been smoking, she had tried to grab the belt from him. And oh, folks, oh, friends and neighbors, she had asked for it. He would testify before the throne of God Almighty that she is going to get it. Yes, yes. Whew. So much reading. He drove her along the wall, swinging the. Okay. He drove her along the wall, swinging the belt, raining blows on her. Her hands were up to protect her face, but he had a clear shot to rest of her. The belt made her thick bullet. That the belt made thick bullet cracks in the quiet room, but she did not scream, as sometimes she did, and she did not beg him to stop, as she usually did. Worst of all, she did not cry, as she always did. The only sounds were the belt and her breathing. His heavy and hoarse, hers quick and light. She broke for the bed on the vanity table on her side of it. Her shoulders were red from the belt's blows. Her hair streamed fire. He lumbered after her, slower, big, very big. He had played squash until he popped an Achilles tendon 2 years ago, and since then his weight had gotten out of hand a little bit, or maybe a lot. Would have been a lot better way to put it. But the muscle was still there, firm cordage, sheathed in fat. Still, he was still alarmed at how out of breath he was. She reached the vanity, and he thought she would crouch over, maybe try to crawl under it. Instead, she groped, turned. Suddenly, the air was full of flying missiles. She was throwing cosmetics at him. A bottle chancellor struck him squarely between the nipples, fell to his feet, shattered. He was suddenly enveloped in the gagging scent of flowers. "Quit it!" he roared. "Quit it, you bitch!" Instead of quitting it, welcome into whoever's here. Her hands flew along the vanity's littered glass top, grabbing whatever they found, throwing it. He groped at his chest where the bottle of Chantley had struck him, unable to believe she had hit him with something. Even as other objects flew around him. The bottle's glass stopper had cut him. It was not much of a cut, a little more than a triangle scratch. But there was a certain red-haired lady who was going to see the sun come up from the hospital bed. Oh, yes, there was. A certain lady who. A jar of cream struck him above the right eyebrow with a sudden cracking force. He heard a dull thud singing inside his head. White light exploded over the eyes' field of vision, and he fell back a step, mouth dropping open. Now a tube of Neva green struck his belly. With a small slapping sound, was she? Was it possible? Yes, she was yelling at him. "I'm going to the airport, you son of a bitch. Do you hear me? I have business, I'm going. You want to get out of my way because I'm going." Blood ran into his right eye, stinging hot. He knuckled it away. He stood there for a moment, staring at her as if he had never seen her before. In a way, he never had. Her breasts heaved rapidly. Her face, all flesh and livid pallor, blazed. Her lips were drawn back from her teeth into a snarl. She had, however, denuded the top of the vanity table. The missile silo was empty. He could still read the fear in her eyes, but it was not fear of him. "You put the clothes back on. Or you put those clothes back," he said, struggling not to pant as he spoke. "That would not sound good. That would sound weak. Then you put that suitcase back and you get into bed. If you do those things, maybe I won't beat you up too bad. Maybe you'll be able to get out of the house in 2 days instead of 2 weeks." "Tom, listen to me," she spoke slowly. Her gaze was very clear. "If you come near me again, I'll kill you. Do you understand that? You tub of guts, I'll kill you." And certainly, maybe it's because of the utter loathing on her face, the contempt. Maybe because she had called him a tub of guts. Or maybe only because of the rebellious way her breast rose and fell. The fear was suffocating him. Hello again, Dolores. It was not a bud or a blossom, but a whole goddamn garden. The fear. The horrible fear that he was not here. Tom Rogan rushed at his wife, not bellowing this time. He came as silently as a torpedo cutting through the water. His intent now was probably not merely to beat and subjugate her, to do to her what she had so rashly said she would do to him. He thought she would run, probably for the bathroom, maybe for the stairs. Instead, she stood her ground. Her hip whacked the wall as she threw her weight against the vanity table, pushing it up against, pushing it up and toward him, ripping two fingernails down with the quick when sweat on her palms caused her hands to slip. For a moment, the table tottered on an angle. Then she shoved herself forward again. The vanity waltzed on one leg, mirror catching the light and reflecting a brief swimming aquarium shadow across the ceiling. Then it tilted forward and outward. It would edge slammed into Tom's upper thighs and knocked him over. This was a musical jingle as bottles tipped over and shattered inside. He saw the mirror strike the floor on his left and threw an arm up to shield his eyes, losing the belt. Glass coughed across the floor, silver on the back. He felt some of it stinging, drawing blood. Now she was crying. Now she was crying, her breath coming in high, screaming sobs. Time after time, she hadn't seen herself leaving Tom's tyranny as she had left that of her father, stealing away in the night, bags piled in the trunk of her cutlass. She was not a stupid woman, certainly not stupid enough to leave now, standing in the rim of this incredible shambles, to believe that she had not loved Tom and did not not in some way love him still. But that did not preclude her fear of him, her hate of him, and her contempt of herself for choosing him for dim reasons buried in times that should be over. Her heart was not breaking. It seemed rather to be broiling in her chest, melting. She was afraid from the heat from her heart might soon destroy her sanity and fire. But above all this, yammering steadily in the back of her mind, she could hear Mike's Hanlon's dry, steady voice. It's come back, Beverly. It's come back, Beverly. It's come back. It's come back. And you promised. The vanity heaved up and down, once, twice, a third time. It looked as if it was breathing. Moving with careful agility, her mouth turned down at the corners of her jerking as if in prelude to some sort of convulsion. She skirted the vanity, toe-stepping through the broken glass, and grabbed the belt just as Tom heaved the vanity off to one side. Then she backed up, sliding her hands into the loop. She took her hair out of her eyes and watched to see what he would do. Tom got up. Some of the mirror glass had cut out one of his cheeks. A diagonal cut traced a line as fine as thread across his brow. He squinted at her as he rose slowly to his feet, and she saw drops of blood on his boxer shorts. You should just give me the belt, he said. Instead, she took 2 turns of it around her hand and looked at him defiantly. Quit it, Bev, right now. If you come for me, I'm going to strap the shit out of you. The words were coming out of her mouth, but she couldn't believe it was her saying them. And just then, who was this caveman in his bloody undershorts anyways? Her husband? Her father? The lover that she had taken in college who had broken her nose one night? Apparently on a whim? Oh, God help me, she thought. God help me now. And still her mouth went on. I can do it, too. You're fat and slow, Tom. I'm going. And I think maybe I'll stay gone. I think maybe it's over. Who's this guy, Denver? Forget it. She realized almost too late that the question had been a distraction. He was coming before the last word was out of his mouth. She whickered the belt through the air and in the arc, and the sound it made when it smashed across his mouth was the sound of a stubborn cork coming out of a bottle. He squealed and clapped his hand to his mouth, his eyes huge, hurt and shocked. Blood began to pour between his fingers and over the backs of his belt, of his hands. "You broke my mouth, you bitch!" he screamed, muffled. "Oh, God, you broke my mouth!" He came at her again, hands reaching, his mouth a wet red smear. His lips appeared to have burst into two places. The crown had been knocked from one of his front teeth. As she watched, he spit it to one side. "You're good." Reading. Nobody's in here though. Part of her was backing away from the scene, sick and moaning, wanting to shut her eyes. That's fine. Is this the one season? Yeah. The empty one? Yeah. He came at her again. His mouth, the crown had been knocked from one of his front teeth. As she watched, he spit it to one side. Part of her was backing away from the scene, sick and moaning, and wanting to shut her eyes. But the other Beverly felt the exultation of a death row convict, freed in a freak earthquake. That Beverly liked all of this just fine. "I wish you'd swallowed it," that one thought. "Wish you choked on it." It was this latter Beverly who swung the belt for the last time. The belt he had used on her buttocks, her legs, her breasts. The belt he used on her times without number over the last 4 years. How many strokes you got depended on how badly you screwed up. Time comes home when dinner's cold. 2 at the bell. Baz working late at the studio and forgets to go home. 3 with the bell. Oh, hey, look at this. Beverly got another barking ticket. 1 at the bell. Across the breasts. He was good. He rarely bruised. It didn't even hurt that much. I need to let him. And what hurt worse was knowing that part of her craved the hurt, craved the humiliation. Last time pays for all, she thought, and swung. She brought the belt in the low, brought it in a side on, and it whacked across his balls with a brisk ouch. She brought it in a side on, and it whacked across his balls with a brisk yet heavy sound. The sound of a woman striking a rug with a carpet beater. That was all it took. All the fight promptly went out, Tom Reagan. Damn, so she pretty much punched him in the dick, like really, really hard with the belt. Ouch. He uttered a thin, strengthless shriek, fell on his knees as if to pray. His hands were between his legs. Yeah, I bet they were. His head was thrown back. Cords stood out on his neck. His mouth was a tragic grimace of pain. His left knee came down squarely on a heavy, potential hook of shattered perfume bottles and rolled silently over onto one side like a whale. One hand left his balls to grab his squirting knee. The blood, she thought. Dear Lord, he's bleeding everywhere. He'll live, Miss New Beverly. The Beverly who seemed to have surfaced at Mike Hamlin's phone call, replied coldly. Guys like him always live. You just get the hell out of here before he decides he wants to do something tango some more. Or before he decides to go down the cellar and get his Winchester. She backed away and felt pain and stabbed her foot as she stepped onto the chunk of glass from the broken vanity mirror. She bent down to grab the handle of her suitcase. She never took her eyes off him. She backed out of the door and she backed down the hall. She was holding the suitcase in front of both hands and banged her shins as she backed. Her cut foot printed bloody heel prints. When she reached the stairs and turned around and went down quickly, not letting herself think. She suspected she had no coherent thoughts left inside anyways, at least for the time being. She felt a light pawing against her leg and screamed. She looked down and saw it at the end of the belt. It was still wrapped around her hand. In this dim light, it looked more like a dead snake than ever. She threw it over the banister, her face a wince of disgust, and saw it land in S on the road of the downstairs hallway. At the foot of the stairs, she grasped the hem of her white lace nightgown cross-handed and pulled it over her head. It was bloody, and she would not wear it 1 second longer, no matter what. She tossed it aside and it billowed on the rubber plant by the doorway to the living room like a lacy parachute. She bent, naked, to the suitcase. Her nipples were cold, hard as bullets. Beverly, you get your ass back upstairs! She gasped, jerked, then bent back toward the staircase. She was strong enough to scream that loud. Her time was a good deal shorter than she had thought. She opened the case and pulled out panties, a blouse, and an old pair of Levi's. She jerked these on standing by the door, her eyes never leaving the stairs. But Tom did not appear at the top of them. He bawled her name twice more, and each time she flinched away from the sound, eyes haunted, her lips pulling back from her teeth, an unconscious snarl. She jabbed the buttons of the blouse through the holes as fast as she could. The top two buttons were gone. She jabbed the buttons of the blouse through the holes as fast as she could. Top two buttons were gone. It was ironic how little of her own sewing had ever got done, and she supposed she looked quite like a part-time hooker, looking for one last quickie before calling it a night. But it would have to do. I'll kill you, you bitch! You fucking bitch! She slammed the suitcase closed and latched it. The arm of the blouse poked out like a tongue. She looked around once, quickly, suspecting that she would never see this house again. She discovered only relief in the idea, and so opened the door and let herself out. She was 3 blocks away, walking with no clear sense of where she was going, when she realized her feet were still bare. The one she had cut, the left, throbbed dully. She had to get something on her feet. It was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. Her wallet and credit cards were at home. She felt in the pockets of the jeans and had come up with nothing but a few puffs of lint. She didn't have a dime, not so much as a red penny. She looked around at the residential neighborhood she was in. Nice homes, manicured lawns and plantings, dark meadows. And suddenly she began to laugh. Beverly Rogan sat on a low stone wall, her suitcase between her dirty feet, and laughed. The stairs were out, and how bright they were. She tilted her head back and she laughed at them. That wild exhilaration washing through her again like a tidal wave that lifted and carried her and cleansed. A force so powerful that any conscious thought was lost. Only her blood thought, and it's one of those powerful voices spoke to her in some of the inarticulate way desired. Although what desire she neither knew nor cared. It was enough to feel that her warmth was filling her up in an instant. Desire, she thought. Desire inside her. That tidal wave of exhilaration seemed to gather speed, rushing her onward toward some inevitable crash. She laughed at the stars, frightened but free. Her terror at the sharp as pain as in the sweep to a raffle. And when a light came on in an upstairs bedroom in the house stone wall belonged to, she grabbed a handle from her suitcase and fled off into the night, still laughing. Whew! I felt that was like an extremely longer 20 pages than my other stream. Granted, I had to take a potty break this time around, but still. Didn't think it'd take that much longer. But your boy's voice is hoarse. It's beat. My back is killing me. I feel like very, very tired out from all this reading. So, I might play some Fortnite when I get home tonight. We'll see. And yeah, until the next one, Daves-Raves out. Peace. Make sure y'all smash that like button if y'all made it to this way.